It took the doctors 3 days to put my name back into my head, but it took me another 6 months to remember why I had wanted to forget it in the first place. I woke up in a sterile white room with a view of a surprisingly lovely little garden, a pounding headache, and a gaping hole where my life used to be. The faces around my bed were a sea of carefully arranged concern. A man who called himself my husband, Robert, held my hand with a grip that was just a little too tight. And 2 grown children, who I learned were named Michael and Sarah, hovered with matching anxious smiles. They were all strangers to me, yet they treated me with such suffocating, solicitous kindness that it felt more like I was a fragile piece of priceless porcelain than their wife and mother. The only problem was I couldn't shake the chilling, gut-level feeling that just before the darkness, these same people were the very reason I had been running. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Now let's get back to it. The official story was as tidy as the hospital sheets. A tragic accident, they called it. I'd been hiking alone on our property, up by the old stone wall, something I apparently did often. There'd been an unusual morning dew, I'd lost my footing on some slick moss, and my head had a very unfortunate meeting with a chunk of granite. A simple slip and fall. Robert said he found me an hour later when I didn't come back for breakfast. He'd carried me half a mile back to the house himself before calling the ambulance. Heroic, wasn't it? The nurses cooed about how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. I'd nod and smile, but inside a little voice was screaming. The first clue that something was off, even through the fog of amnesia, was the ring. A heavy diamond sat on my left hand, a real monster of a rock. It felt alien and cumbersome. Every time Robert squeezed my hand, the metal bit into my neighboring fingers. I'd look down at this thing, this symbol of our supposed 3 decades of blissful marriage, and feel absolutely nothing. No flicker of warmth, no muscle memory of putting it on. It was like wearing a costume. They brought in photo albums, trying to jog my memory. There I was, Margaret, a woman with my face, smiling from a ski-Wifton Vale, clinking champagne glasses on a yacht, cutting a ribbon at some charity event. She looked happy, I suppose, content. Robert would narrate each photo. "Oh, that was Tuscany. Remember, darling? You adored the wine." Or, "That's Michael's graduation from Wharton. You were so proud you cried for an hour." He painted a picture of a life that was glossy and perfect, the kind of life you see in the pages of a magazine. But when I looked in the mirror, the woman looking back didn't seem to fit the pictures. Yes, the face was mine. I was 64, and the lines around my eyes and mouth were proof of a life lived. But my eyes held a secret, a deep-seated weariness that the smiling woman in the photos didn't have. It was like watching a stranger. My son, Michael, was an investment banker, all sharp suits and a sharper smile. He visited me every day, bringing me business journals. "Just to keep your mind sharp, Mom," he'd say, patting my arm. He spoke to me slowly, as if my head injury had turned me into a child. "The market's volatile, but don't you worry. Dad and I have everything with the portfolio under control." I had a portfolio? Apparently a very significant one. It was all a bit hazy, but the number he tossed around had a lot of zeros. My daughter Sarah was a different brand of attentive. She was an art curator, and her kindness felt curated. She would bring me expensive, scentless flowers and architectural vases and art books with glossy pages. "We have to re-engage your senses, Mother. We have to reconnect you to beauty." She and her brother would flank my bed like perfectly coiffed sentinels, their concern a performance so flawless it had to be rehearsed. Robert, though, he was the star of the show. My husband. He was handsome, I had to give him that. Silver at the temples, a deep, reassuring voice. He spoon-fed me bland hospital soup, read me poetry I apparently used to love, and recounted tales of our whirlwind romance. Yet whenever he touched me, a jolt, not of recognition, but of something like static electricity would shoot up my arm, an instinctual recoil. My body remembered something my mind didn't. He'd talk about our plans, selling the big house, downsizing to a luxury condo downtown, traveling the world. All that stress, running the foundation, it was too much for you, Margaret, he'd say, his voice dripping with sympathy. This is a blessing in disguise, a chance to start fresh, a simpler life. It sounded lovely. It also sounded like a sales pitch. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The days in the hospital bled together into a quiet routine of neurological tests, physical therapy, and these carefully managed family visits. They seemed to have a schedule, my family. Robert in the morning, Sarah midday, Michael in the evening. It was all very organized, ensuring I was never alone for too long, but also never with more than one of them at a time. It was as if they didn't want their stories to get crossed. My first real breakthrough didn't come from a photo or a story. It came from a nurse named Brenda. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 50s with sensible shoes and a wry sense of humor. Unlike everyone else, she didn't treat me like a Ming vase. She'd bustle in, check my vitals, and talk to me like a real person. "How's the amnesia club today, hun?" she asked one afternoon, changing my IV drip. "Remembered your social security number yet?" I gave her a weak smile. Not even my favorite color. It'll come back. Or it won't," she said with a shrug. "Sometimes a clean slate ain't the worst thing in the world." She paused, her eyes twinkling. "Your family, they sure are something else. Never seen a bunch so dedicated. You must be one special lady." There was something in her tone, a slight emphasis on dedicated, that caught my ear. "They seem to be," I said, fishing. "I guess I'm very lucky." Brenda snorted, a quick, sharp sound she'd tried to cover with a cough. "Lucky. Yep. Especially that husband of yours. A real prince." And there it was, a little crack in the perfect facade. Prince. The word dripped with sarcasm so thick you could have frosted a cake with it. I seized the opening. "Brenda," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "when they brought me in, what was I wearing?" She looked up from the drip, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to genuine curiosity. "What, your clothes?" "Yes. They keep showing me pictures of myself in these elegant dresses and cashmere sweaters. But what was I wearing the day I fell?" Brenda leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. "Honey, you weren't wearing cashmere, I can tell you that. You came in wearing a pair of old, muddy jeans, a t-shirt that said, 'Earth without art is just and a pair of beat-up hiking boots. And," she paused, leaning in conspiratorially, "you had a backpack with you." A backpack? This was new. No one had mentioned a backpack. What was in it? "Not much," she said. "A half-eaten apple, a bottle of water, a compass. Oh, and about $10,000 in cash wrapped in a rubber band." I stared at her, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. A passport, cash, a woman wearing old jeans and a funny t-shirt. That woman wasn't the Margaret from the photo albums. That woman was going somewhere. That woman was running. "My family," I whispered. "Did they take the backpack?"
Brenda's face hardened slightly. "Your husband did. Said it was all just your little eccentricities. Packed it all up in a neat little bag right after the doctor told him you had profound amnesia. Seemed real relieved to hear it, if you ask me. Relieved. The word echoed in the silent room. They weren't concerned. They were relieved. The kindness, the gentle smiles, the careful stories, it was all an act. A beautifully staged play put on for an audience of one. An audience who couldn't remember the real story. My mind was a blank page, and they were scrambling to write their own version on it before the original ink decided to bleed back through. My name might have been Margaret, but for the first time since waking up, I felt a flicker of the woman I must have been. And I was beginning to realize she wasn't just running from something. She was running for her life. Brenda's words were the key. A key that didn't unlock my memory, not yet, but it unlocked the door to the cage they had built around me. I finally understood that this wasn't a recovery. It was an interrogation. A gentle, smiling, 30 decades-long gaslighting campaign, condensed into a few weeks. When they discharged me, Robert helped me into the passenger seat of a car that felt more like a spaceship, a cavernous black Mercedes with leather that smelled aggressively of money. Driving up to our house was like arriving at a museum. It was a sprawling, modern affair of glass and stone, beautiful but cold, sitting on acres of perfectly manicured lawn that looked like it had been trimmed with tweezers. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a statement. Inside, the feeling only intensified. The floors were polished white marble, the furniture was sparse, and looked deeply uncomfortable, and on every wall hung huge, abstract paintings that screamed with silent, angry colors. Sarah was there to greet us, adjusting a single lily in a vase on a console table. "Welcome home, Mother." She kissed the air next to my cheek. "I had the whole place deep cleaned to remove any allergens. Fresh start." But the air still felt thick with secrets. My life as they presented it was one of orderly, quiet luxury. Robert had my schedule printed out each morning. 9 a.m., breakfast, oat bran and berries. 10 a.m., light physiotherapy in the sunroom. 11 a.m., memory exercises with flashcards Sarah had made, which mostly involved identifying famous artists or European capitals. Lunch at 1 p.m., a nap, then maybe a slow, supervised walk around the perfect gardens. It was the schedule of an elegant prisoner. They answered the phone, they vetted the mail, they spoke for me when the occasional pre-approved old friend would call. "She's doing remarkably well," Robert would say into the phone, his voice smooth as silk. "But she tires easily, we're keeping her world very calm and quiet for now." It was Michael who tipped their hand. He came for dinner one night about 2 weeks after I'd been home. After our meal of poached salmon and steamed asparagus, food with no personality, just like the rest of my supposed life, he and Robert exchanged a look. Michael cleared his throat and slid a handsome leather-bound portfolio across the polished mahogany table. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on that same placating tone he'd used in the hospital, "we know this is a lot for you to process, but there are a few business matters that need your attention." He opened the folder. Inside were pages and pages of dense, legal-looking documents with little yellow sticky arrows pointing to lines that said, "Sign here." "It's just some updates to the estate plan and the family trust. Things we were discussing before your accident, just tidying things up, moving some assets into a more stable fund that Michael has found. It will simplify everything for you, darling. You won't have to worry about a thing." I stared at the pages. The letters swam before my eyes. Power of attorney, irrevocable trust, liquidation of assets. The words meant something, but the context was gone. All I had was Brenda's voice in my head. He seemed real relieved to hear it. My gut screamed at me, a primal instinct to protect myself. I looked from my son's eager, predatory smile to my husband's mask of gentle concern. I let my hand tremble just a little as I reached for the pen. I touched the paper, then I pulled my hand back and let my face crumple in theatrical confusion. "Oh, Michael, Robert, I'm sorry. It's all just squiggles to me. I don't even remember my own middle name. How can I sign something so important? I'm just not all there yet." I looked up at them, allowing my eyes to well with manufactured tears. I saw a flicker of frustration in Michael's eyes before he masked it. Robert was quicker. He immediately reached across the table and patted my hand. "Of course, darling. Forgive us. How thoughtless of me," he said, his voice a balm. "We're just trying to look out for you. We can wait. We'll wait until you feel 100% yourself again." He slid the folder shut, but not before I saw the tight set of his jaw.
He thought he was playing with a broken doll, but he was about to find out the doll remembered how to pull the strings. That little victory gave me courage. I started to explore. I still had the amnesia, this blank canvas of a mind, but my body remembered how to walk, how to open doors. As long as I was supervised, I was allowed my little tours. They showed me the library, filled with unread leather-bound books, the formal dining room we apparently never used, and the master suite with its 2 separate closets, each the size of a New York apartment. It all felt like a hotel. Then one day, while Robert was on a conference call in his study, I found it. Tucked away behind the massive, climate-controlled wine cellar was a simple door. It led outside to a small, slightly overgrown path. My heart started beating faster. This path was not manicured. It was real. I followed it, and at the end, nestled under the shade of a massive old oak tree, was a small greenhouse, a potting shed. The glass was dusty, and a climbing rose had woven its way around the doorframe. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. The moment I stepped inside, the smell hit me. Damp earth, geraniums, and something sharp and green. It was the first thing that had smelled real, alive, and familiar since I woke up. The place was a chaotic, beautiful mess. Clay pots in stacks, some with soil still clinging to them, half-empty bags of potting mix, tools hanging on the wall, worn smooth with use. There were sketches of garden layouts tacked on a corkboard. In the corner, on a rustic wooden bench, sat a pair of muddy boots, identical to the ones Brenda had described. My boots. I ran my hand along the rough wood of the potting bench, dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon light. My fingers closed around something hard and cool. I picked it up. It was a hand trowel, its wooden handle dark and smooth from years of being gripped. The metal was caked with dried mud, and then it happened. It wasn't a gentle dawning. It was a tidal wave. The feel of the trowel in my hand, the specific weight of it, the way my thumb fit perfectly in a worn spot on the handle, it crashed through the dam. A flash of Robert's face, not concerned but snarling. "You're spending how much on that ridiculous charity project? We're talking about our retirement, Margaret." Another flash. Michael, on the phone in the library, his back to the door. No, she has no idea. She still thinks the foundation fund is untouchable. Dad's already moved the first $2 million into the offshore account. Sarah, her voice like ice chips. Mother is emotionally unstable. If she continues to give away our inheritance, we'll have to look at having her declared incompetent. It would be a kindness, really. The memories flooded in, one after another, sharp and agonizingly clear. I remembered everything. I remembered finding the statements from the Cayman Islands account hidden in Robert's golf bag. I remembered overheard phone calls. I remembered the patronizing way they'd started treating me for the past year, as if I were already senile, as they systematically looted the fortune my father had left me. My fortune. $50 million. And I remembered the fall. It wasn't a simple slip. Robert had followed me on my hike that morning. I told him I knew. I told him I was leaving, that I was going to my lawyer, that they were all cut off. We had argued there by the old stone wall. His face was purple with rage. He had grabbed my arm, I'd pulled away, stumbled backwards on the mossy rocks, and his hand had pushed, just a small, quick shove in the center of my back.
It wasn't an outright murderous heave. It was a cowardly, opportunistic little nudge, enough to send me off balance, enough to make my head crack against that granite slab, enough to silence me. He must have panicked seeing me lying still. He must have cooked up the hero story on that half-mile carry back to the house. And then at the hospital, when the doctor said the magic words, profound retrograde amnesia, he must have felt like he won the lottery twice.
I dropped the trowel. It clattered on the stone floor. I sank onto the bench, gasping for air, the potting shed spinning around me. Every fake smile, every gentle touch, every concerned word from the past few weeks replayed in my mind. But now they were grotesque, encoded in poison. They didn't think I'd had an accident. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought their meal ticket had conveniently forgotten she was about to cancel the checks. Tears of rage and betrayal streamed down my face. My first instinct was to run back to that glass house and scream the truth in their faces, to call the police, to watch their perfect, curated world shatter into a million pieces. But then, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. What was my word against theirs? The loving, concerned family against the confused woman with a brain injury. They would just say it was a fantasy, a side effect of the trauma. They would double down on their story of my instability. They would have me committed. I was trapped. Or was I? I took a deep, shuddering breath and stood up. I looked at my reflection in a grimy pane of glass. The confused, fragile Margaret they had created looked back at me. And in that moment, I realized my amnesia wasn't a prison. It was a weapon. It was the perfect disguise. They thought I was a blank slate? Fine. I would be a blank slate. I would be the sweet, simple, confused woman they wanted me to be. I would smile and nod and let them think they were in complete control. They had written the first act of this little play, but I was going to write the ending. And let me tell you, it was going to be a finale they would never forget. I walked out of the potting shed, my mind no longer a fog, but a chessboard, and every piece on it was mine to move. The game had just begun. Returning to the main house from that dusty greenhouse was like stepping from reality back onto a movie set. But now, I knew my lines. I was no longer the confused protagonist. I was the director, disguised as a bit part actor. I walked into the kitchen, where Robert was pouring himself a glass of iced tea, the picture of casual control. "There you are, darling," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Lost your way?" "Oh, no," I said, putting on my best sweetly befuddled expression. I waved a hand vaguely. "I just found the most charming little glass shed out back. It was full of dirt and pots. Did I used to garden?" I made the word sound foreign, like something one might read about in a book. Robert's relief was palpable. The real Margaret, the one he'd pushed, had lived in that greenhouse. Her hands were always in the soil. It was her sanctuary, her escape from his world of sterile transactions. My forgetting it was, to him, the final proof that she was truly gone. "Yes, darling, it was a silly little hobby of yours. Kept you busy. But it's a lot of work. We were thinking of having it taken down, maybe putting in a nice water feature." I just smiled and nodded. "Oh, that sounds lovely. Much tidier." Inside, a cold fury burned. Take down my sanctuary? My one real place in this entire estate? Not on your life, buddy. I spent the next week becoming the Margaret of their dreams. I was docile, agreeable, and most importantly, forgettable. I sat through Michael's condescending explanations of market fluctuations, nodding as if I understood. I allowed Sarah to dress me in bland, beige cashmere outfits that she said were soothing. I listened for hours as Robert recounted his heavily edited version of our life together, a life where he was the patient, brilliant provider, and I was his pretty, slightly flighty, adored wife. I observed. I listened at doorways. I watched how they never left their cell phones unlocked, or Michael's laptop screen would flick off when I entered a room. One evening, I pretended to be asleep on the sofa and heard Sarah whisper to Robert in the hall, "She's so much easier like this. It's a shame it took a head injury for her to finally calm down." They thought they were managing a simpleton, but they were giving me all the ammunition I needed. I learned their schedules, their habits, their tells. Robert had a tic. He'd tap his front tooth with his fingernail when he was wrying. Michael's smile became a fraction too wide when he felt smug. And Sarah, my darling Sarah, would start rearranging things. A cushion, a book, a flower, when she was nervous. Their perfect facades were full of cracks, and I could see every single one. My physiotherapist, Clara, came 3 times a week. She was a young, earnest woman in her late 20s with a kind face and a sense of duty. She was my only link to the outside world that wasn't filtered through my family. She was my way out. During one of our sessions, as I was pedaling gently on a stationary bike, I started my performance. I let a few tears slide down my cheeks. "What's wrong, Margaret?" Clara asked, immediately concerned. "It's just, my friend Eleanor's birthday is next week," I whispered, sniffing. "I only just remembered, or I think I did. Robert had to remind me, but they handle all my mail now, and, well, it feels silly, but I want to send her a card myself. I want to feel useful." I looked at her, my eyes wide with manufactured helplessness. "I know this is a terrible thing to ask, Clara, but could you post a letter for me? I don't want to bother Robert with it. He does so much already." Clara's face softened. Of course she would. What harm could there be in an old lady wanting to send a birthday card? The next session, I had it ready. It was a simple, store-bought card with a floral design. Inside, in shaky, deliberately messy handwriting, I'd written a short, sweet birthday note to Eleanor. But sealed inside a second, smaller envelope tucked within the card was a letter for a man named Arthur Jenkins. Arthur was my father's lawyer, and then mine. He was a sharp, fiercely loyal man in his late 70s, who I knew for a fact despised Robert on a cellular level. He'd known me since I was a little girl. The note was short and to the point. "Arthur, Code Nightingale, I need to see you. I will be at the library downtown, 3rd floor reading room, Thursday at 11 a.m. Come alone. Destroy this note. M." Code Nightingale was a silly emergency phrase my father and I had come up with years ago. It meant drop everything, burn the evidence, and come running. I prayed Arthur remembered it. I watched from the window as Clara drove away, the little white envelope containing my declaration of war sitting in her handbag. They had built the walls of my prison, but they'd forgotten to check for loose bricks, and I was about to knock the whole thing down. Now, I just needed a reason to be at the library. The next morning at breakfast, I brought up the dreaded folder. "Robert," I began, folding my napkin in my lap, "I know I was confused before, but I've been thinking about those financial papers." Robert and Michael, who was also there, exchanged a look. I could practically see the dollar signs flashing in their eyes. "What about them, darling?" Robert asked, all smooth encouragement. "Well, it worries me. My head is such a jumble, and I would hate for things to be a mess if, you know." I looked down at my plate. "I want to make things simple for you all. Michael, you are so clever with these things. Maybe we should look at them again. I want to cooperate." It was like watching two wolves sight a wounded deer. They practically salivated. Michael immediately launched into a speech about securing our future and consolidating assets, and by the end of it, they had decided that they needed to take me to see the family wealth manager the following week to sign some documents. That's wonderful, but my mind is still so fuzzy. I've heard reading can help. Sarah mentioned the public library has a wonderful art collection. Perhaps I could go on Thursday morning, just for an hour, to get my brain working before our big meeting? Robert beamed. It was the perfect idea. An intellectual, supervised outing that proved their Margaret was on the mend and becoming her old self, or rather, the new self they preferred. What a splendid thought, darling. I'll drive you myself. Perfect. The trap was set. Thursday came and Robert drove me to the grand, pillared library downtown. He walked me to the main entrance. Now, I have to take a quick business call. He tapped his phone. I'll wait in the car right out front. You just enjoy yourself for an hour, darling. Don't strain yourself. He patted my shoulder, the benevolent warden granting a brief furlough. I walked into the cool, quiet building, my heart hammering. I went straight to the elevator and up to the 3rd floor. The reading room was vast and hushed, smelling of old paper and wood polish. I found a secluded table in an alcove, my back to the wall, with a clear view of the entrance. I sat and I waited.
At 11:05, I saw him. Arthur Jenkins. He was older, grayer, and leaned a little more heavily on his cane than I remembered, but he still had the same bulldog jaw and the same sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He scanned the room, spotted me, and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He walked over slowly, pulling out the chair opposite me and sinking into it with a soft groan. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of concern and immense relief. "Margaret," he breathed. "My God, we've all been so worried. Your husband said you weren't seeing any visitors." "Arthur," I said, my voice finally my own, low and steady and free of the pathetic tremble I'd been faking for weeks. "Thank you for coming. I don't have amnesia." He blinked. He processed that for a moment, his brow furrowing. "I see," he said slowly, the legal mind already working, putting the pieces together. "Robert didn't find me after I fell. He was with me. We argued. He pushed me. He and my children are stealing my father's money, Arthur. They've been siphoning it offshore for at least a year. And now they think I've lost my memory and they are trying to get me to sign over control of everything that's left." Arthur listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with every word. The aged friendly lawyer disappeared, replaced by the formidable legal shark I knew he was. He leaned forward, his gnarled hand gripping the head of his cane until the knuckles were white. When I finished, a long, heavy silence hung between us. He broke it, his voice a low rumble, filled with a cold, righteous anger. "Margaret," he said, a fire lighting in his old eyes. "They have picked a fight with the wrong woman. Let's go to war." Arthur's first order of business was to verify everything. "War isn't one with emotion, Margaret," he'd said in that hushed library alcove. "It's one with paperwork." We laid out the plan right there. I was to continue my performance as the docile amnesiac, agreeing to the meeting with their crooked wealth manager. In the meantime, Arthur would use the original, unamended power of attorney my father had set up for me decades ago, a document Robert and the kids had conveniently forgotten about, to quietly get his hands on every single financial statement from every account he could find. My job was to delay the signing for as long as possible. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I feigned headaches. I pretended to have dizzy spells. I spilled coffee on a set of preliminary documents Michael had so helpfully printed for me to review. Each time their frustration grew, but it was always masked by that suffocating concern. "Don't you worry, Mom, we'll get another copy. Just rest." They were so close to the finish line they could taste it, and it was making them sloppy. Meanwhile, Arthur was working miracles. Every other day, I would get a simple postcard in the mail from my friend Eleanor, delivered by the regular mailman, which my family ignored as harmless chatter. Inside, tucked beneath the stamp, was a microfilm dot, a bit of Cold War spycraft Arthur loved. I'd use a magnifying glass from a desk set Robert never touched to read the updates. Found the Cayman Islands. 3 transfers, total 4.2 M. Another. Liquidated stock portfolio. Proceeds rerouted through a shell corp Michael established 3 months ago. Every message was another nail in their coffin. The big day finally arrived. I let them dress me up like a doll for the slaughter, in a soft gray dress and low heels. Robert drove, Michael sat in the back, both of them radiating a smug, proprietary confidence. We walked into the glass and chrome offices of the wealth manager, a man named Preston who had the smarmy smile of a game show host. He was clearly in their pocket. We sat in a conference room with a view of the entire city. Preston laid out the final documents on the polished table. It was an impressive stack of paper. "Now, Margaret," he began, his voice oozing insincere sympathy, "this is just to formalize the verbal agreements you, Robert, and Michael made before your setback. It puts your portfolio into a protected family trust, managed by Michael and Robert. It just takes all the stress right off your shoulders." "So she won't have to worry about a thing," Robert added, placing a pen in my hand. "Just sign here, and here, and here," he pointed with a manic finger. I looked down at the documents, at the pen in my hand. I looked up at my husband, my children, and their financial henchmen. I saw the greed, the impatience, the utter certainty that they had won. I took a deep breath. "No," I said. My voice was quiet, but it landed in the silent room like a boulder. Robert's smile froze. "Darling? What did you say?"
I pushed the pen away and folded my hands on the table. The frail, confused Margaret was gone. The woman from the greenhouse was here now. I said, "No, I'm not signing anything." Michael laughed, a short, nervous sound. "Mom, you're just tired. It's been a big day. Preston, can we get her a glass of water?" "I am not tired, Michael. I am not confused, and I am not signing," I repeated, my voice gaining strength. "I remember everything." The shift in the room was instantaneous. The air crackled. Robert went pale, the color draining from his face. Michael's jaw dropped. Preston, the wealth manager, looked back and forth between us, his professional smile flickering like a faulty light bulb. "Margaret, this isn't funny," Robert stammered, his hand reaching for mine. "Your injury was convenient, wasn't it? Just as I discovered the millions you'd been funneling out of my accounts and into your little hidey hole in the Cayman Islands." I turned my gaze to my son. "And just as you were liquidating my stock portfolio, Michael, did you think I wouldn't find out about the Shell Corporation? Really?" I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the table to a now sweating Preston. "These are copies of my original power of attorney, my father's will, and my own, all of which appoint my lawyer, Mr. Arthur Jenkins, as my sole fiduciary representative in all matters.
I believe you'll find them in order." As if on cue, the conference room door opened. Arthur walked in, looking like a grim specter of justice, followed by two other stone-faced lawyers from his firm and a woman I didn't recognize. "Preston," Arthur said, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Fancy seeing you here. This is Agent Cho from the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. She has a few questions for you about account number 734B GT in Grand Cayman." Preston looked like he was going to faint. Chaos erupted. Michael started shouting about a misunderstanding about his mother's delusions. Robert just sat there, frozen, his face a mask of utter ruin. He finally understood. I hadn't been a victim recovering. I had been a predator, hunting. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Arthur's legal team descended like wolves. They froze every account. They clawed back every stolen dollar. Agent Cho and her colleagues unraveled Robert and Michael's entire scheme, and the charges piled up: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. They even looked into the accident. But without physical evidence, the best I could do was leave Robert with the chilling knowledge that I knew what he did. His real punishment wasn't prison. My final act was the reading of the new will. I summoned Michael and Sarah to Arthur's office a few weeks later. Robert was out on bail, a broken, aged man I never wanted to see again. My children sat stiffly across the massive desk from me and Arthur, their faces sullen and angry. They still believed they were owed something. Arthur cleared his throat and began to read from the document I had drafted. I, Margaret Eleanor Vance, being of sound mind and body, he went through the legal formalities and then got to the point, do hereby bequeath my entire personal and financial estate, valued at approximately $52 million, in its entirety. He paused, looking over his spectacles at my two greedy children, to be divided equally among the National Humane Society, Doctors Without Borders, and the public library system of the city. Sarah gasped, "What? She can't do that. That's our money." "It never was, my dear. It was my father's, and then it was mine. You never saw it as a gift. You saw it as a debt owed to you." Michael stood up, his face red with fury. "You can't just cut us off. We're your family." "Family?" I asked, and the ice in my voice made even Arthur shiver. "Family doesn't push you off a cliff and then smile in your face while they pick your pockets. For 6 months, you had a chance. When you thought I had nothing, you could have shown 1 ounce of genuine love, 1 moment of real care. But all you cared about was the money. You wanted the invalid, but only if she came with the inheritance. Well, the inheritance is gone. You're left with just me." I stood up, my own woman at last. "And I want absolutely nothing to do with you." I walked out of that office and didn't look back. I sold the cold glass house and the fancy cars. I kept the greenhouse and my old pair of muddy boots. My name is Margaret, and I remember it very well now. It's the name of a woman who was underestimated, the name of a woman who was wronged, and the name of a woman who, in the end, took back everything. They thought my mind was a blank page. They just didn't realize I was the one holding the pen, and that my favorite stories are the ones about justice. The garden is thriving now, and believe me, so am I.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.